What's going on, guys? Chrono here. Welcome back to the channel. This is gonna be a bit of an awkward sort of video because unfortunately the servers are down, so I can't use my usual backdrops for having these sort of discussions. So if you guys are not a huge fan of looking at my dumb face, feel free to toss it into the background. It's mostly just gonna be a conversation to have with you guys. So while I was sitting with my chat and we were talking about the article that showed all the new skills, something started to come up, something that we talked about a couple of times that realistically I had never considered before that moment in time. Basically, hybrid classes are going to go in a very odd way in Stia. Let me explain a bit. So in case you're wondering, when I say hybrid classes, I mean realistically mixing two weapon types that don't normally belong together. Maybe two types of weapons that are of different damage types. So in case you're unfamiliar with what I'm talking about, maybe you're a bit newer to PSO2, you got three different damage types. You have striking, range, and tech. Striking being melee, of course, range being range, and then tech being, casting techniques, so on and so forth. So when you look at those three different damage types, you augment for them individually. There are some hybrid augments, but hybrid augments realistically were weaker than just augmenting one stat. And in most cases, augmenting that main stat would primarily get you more damage. Now, before we jump into this too far, keep in mind that what I'm talking about is optimization, right? It is closer towards, I guess, meta conversation, but optimizing is not necessarily meta. Optimizing depends on what your end goal actually is. You can optimize for off meta play, and viability depends on your definition of what's viable versus what isn't. Realistically, the entire game can be played as long as you can meet the BP requirement. However, what you actually accomplish in that group or what you're trying to accomplish, whether it's solo or in a group, can vary pretty drastically depending upon your gear and how you're set up. So fast forward a bit back to our original conversation, hybrid augments or hybrid classes. Bouncer and Braver essentially have been the only two or the two hybrid classes that are in the game. Bouncer being melee or striking and tech, and Braver being striking and range. Now, until now, it wasn't really optimal for the class to run both weapons. You realistically wanted to run one or the other, and you would augment for that primary stat, either melee or range or tech, depending upon what class you were playing. Bouncer, of course, it was striking or tech, and then for Braver, it was striking or range. Now, you could do some pretty interesting stuff with other classes, right? Like some Bravers were actually sub-Braver main class ranger while they were playing with bow and rifle. I know as a bouncer, I would play striking and I would use, in some cases, soaring blades. And then there were some arguments for using knuckles, arguments for using, a double saber, and then some arguments for using twin daggers, depending upon your different situations. Jet boots didn't really care about much of anything. They could just take advantage of some tech stuff, so they would throw in Talus every once in a while. That was fairly useful for them since they were already augmented tech. But with the Stia region release, we're getting two new skills added to each of these classes. Well, one apiece. It's allowing the scaling for these classes to work for both of the weapons that are associated with them. What I mean by this is that if you have this skill, it's going to calculate what your highest stat is of the two damage types and then use that to scale both of your weapons. For example, if I'm augmented all melee or all striking, it's going to cause my soaring blades and my jet boots to scale off of striking, meaning that I don't have to augment hybrid anymore. I can augment one type and then get the full benefit, which on the surface seems like a great change, right? You can play both weapons now. Certain weapons that felt like they needed something else. I'll be honest, I feel like out of the four weapons, the only weapon that needed anything was soaring blades. The other three weapons don't feel like they really need anyone else. They can kind of stand on their own, but that's a conversation for another day. Regardless, looking at the weapons now, you're able to play them together. Basically, what some people would say, play the class correctly, which I disagree, but again, conversation for another day. You can now play, say, soaring blades and jet boots. But this also brings up something else that was interesting that was brought to my attention by my chat. At the time, there's another combination of weapons that people have really wanted to put together, and there was no real way to make it viable, I would say. You could do it, but basically you can do anything in the game, right? Like you could pretty much do anything and it's kind of considered a challenge run in almost a sense. But now you can optimize this and make it fairly good. I'm talking about Jet Boots Knuckles. These are weapons of 2 different damage types. However, with Bouncer as your main class in this new skill, it's going to cause Jet Boots to scale off of melee. So if, say, you were augmented for full melee, you have Bouncer as your main class, you can cause your Jet Boots to scale off of melee just like your Knuckles would. Because you can't change Knuckles, right? Like, this isn't a skill for fighter, so you can't use that. But you can play Bouncer fighter and play Jet Boot Knuckles and have them both scale off of melee, because Knuckles scales off of it naturally, Jet Boots can scale off it because of the skill. Something kind of cool to think about. And the crazy thing is that it actually could work. Not like you're just forcing it, like playing the 2 weapons individually and switching between them, but Jet Boots has really good PAs, has elemental downs, has basically everything it needs. The one thing that it's like not really hurting for, but it could do better, is swaying, basically counter damage. And that's the thing that Knuckles does the best. Knuckle Sway is insanely powerful, and it's stored. You don't have to use it immediately. You can sway in the normal attack later and be perfectly fine. So you can play full on Jet Boots and then have Knuckle Sway in your back pocket, and it's actually optimal. You can definitely do that. Now, granted, if you're playing Jet Boots optimally, you don't need it. The only situation I could find that Knuckles really would be useful to Jet Boots would be if you were fighting a target that happened to just throw something at you while you can't reach it and you can't deal damage to it. Knuckle Sway would allow you to store that next normal attack for later that you could use. But that's really about it. Jet Boots can kind of cover everything else on its own. You don't really need it, but it is something interesting to think about that can be done now. Also, this does change up the cost of augmentation, because no longer are you forced to augment melee or are forced to augment range. For these hybrid classes, you can augment either or, whatever one is cheapest, meaning that unfortunately to you rangers out there, your augments are probably going to go up in price, and fortunately for melee classes or striking classes, they're going to go a bit down. Things are going to even out, which is fair. Thank God. I know it's been a long time, but hey, I'll tell you right now, for the range guys out there, you were on your way to getting your augment screwed over anyway, because let's be honest, that new Gunslash or the new Gunblade class is definitely going to be range. But that's all that aside, just an interesting thing to think about. Now, the Knuckle Jet Boot combination can happen. That's not the only one too. Look at it from Braver's perspective. I had a friend of mine show me a video where someone was playing they were playing Katana Rifle. Now this one's probably going to have a little bit less viability or less usefulness, since realistically you could just use a bow. In my opinion, I feel like you'd be better off. But with Rifle, or even honestly with Launcher, you can take advantage of the grenades from Ranger. You'd be playing Braver Ranger, of course, which I have seen people do beforehand, and I feel like technically Ranger Braver would be better because of how much you have access to as your main class, even while subclass Braver and just using something like, let's say, Rifle Bow. But it's something you can do now, right? Like, that person's playstyle that before was just like, this is novel, this is kind of cool that you want to do this. Now it technically can work, and you actually can optimize for it. He can augment full range, play Braver Ranger, and now have his katana scale off of range augments, and not have his katana hurt, in damage, because he couldn't get as much out of the scaling because the augments were kind of crappier. Like, realistically, hybrid augments were worse. Like, they just were. And this isn't like a knock to anyone who wanted to play hybrid beforehand. You guys are awesome. I'm glad you're able to do as much as you can. Don't have your gear be the reason that happens. Like, don't give that sort of wind to your gear. I usually have people that play hybrid always tell me, hey, if this is so much worse, then why do I do so much better than all these other people? Well, that's because you're skillful. Don't let your gear take that from you. That's not how that works. But yeah, it's an interesting conversation to have. It's interesting to think about, and I wanted to bring it to you guys and say what you guys thought. Was there anything that you thought of, any combinations that you wouldn't ever think about beforehand, that now could be a possibility that you could do with Braver or with Braver or with Bouncer, that maybe I couldn't even think of? Anyway, guys, I'm rambling. It's getting late. I want to get some sleep before Stia comes out and that stream comes up. So in case you're curious, we are going to be streaming at 12 a.m. EST, and we'll be going all the way till Stia launch. So if you need somewhere to hang out, feel free to come chill with us. We'll be, coping that there isn't any, extra maintenance, but we'll have to see. Anyway, guys, like if you guys enjoyed the video, subscribe if you want to keep up with more, and I'll see all you wonderful individuals next time. Take care. Peace out.